moving on from the schematic diagram, you can start soldering up the inputs and output pins onto the motor drivers. For the motor connections, I shall be using the JST XH range, commonly used on LiPo batteries as the battery balance port. There are three parts to the XH connectors. This one, being the socket, is soldered onto the board, and we've got the plug housing that will go into that socket, so that's designed to fit one way around. And we've got the crimp terminals that crimp onto the ends of the wires, and they would fit inside the plug once they've been crimped onto the ends of the wires. One tip: when soldering these sockets onto a board, just plug in a tail end into the socket before you actually solder it, and that will hold these pins in alignment, because obviously you get heat travelling up the pins and they can sort of wander around when the plastic around it becomes liquid for a little while. So once they're soldered, then this can be unplugged and the pins will stay in alignment. So yeah, just bear that in mind. On the input side, I'll be using DuPont pin headers. This is a row of 7, but the 4th pin is removed, and that is the standby pin. The motor plug-ins, JST connectors soldered onto the board. Got the standby connections across, and then we've got the power, so we've got the battery voltage, 5V logic voltage, and ground. So it's duplicated on the other one as well. Now I've put some double-sided tape on, and on this side of the board with all the connections on, the idea will be to straddle those, stick those down onto the board there, and then we've got the power leads coming away. So we've got the motor driver boards attached to the top wafer now, or the top layer, and what I've done is just put a dab of super glue in 2 positions there, just to hold the wires still. It will eventually come up through that slot on the side and reappear top side. On the input side, this is now ready to accept these connectors, which is a DuPont connector. So I'll be loading up with 6 wires, and here's an example of a wire with a DuPont connector on. I should be doing my own terminals, so I'm just using this as an example, but this is designed to slide into the 7-way sleeve until it latches in and locks into place. So I can then plug that into there, like so. They'll come around to this area where they're connected up to the Arduino. Okay, so I made a start on the nano board, so this is the main controller really. I've pre-loaded the program. So it's more or less ready to go. So this will be sighted at the end of this bracket, and it's responsible really for driving the motor drivers. I've soldered on the 3 channels onto the appropriate pins and just put them into little bunches. So they're bunches of 3. So the colour coding at the moment is the yellow is the signal wire, or the PWM. The blue and the grey are responsible for the direction of the motor. So there's 3 of those. So I'm going to terminate those, the ends of these wires, onto the DuPont connectors that will connect eventually. It will kind of sit like that, so these cables will run down underneath and connect on that way. I'll terminate these DuPont terminals. Got 9 of those to fit, and then they will fit inside the DuPont sleeves. This now is ready to mock build. I'll just point out some of the connections. Most of the connections are on the back. So basically I've got the connections to the motor drivers. Okay, so I'm going to be using three DC motors and 2 servos. So the 3 DC motors go up to the motor drivers, and the 2 servos go on pin 10 and 11. So it's D10 and D11. I've got the radio receiver connections wired up as well, and that's taken off 5 volts from this board, and I've got a ground, so it's 5 volts ground, and I'm going into RX0 on the yellow. So those 3 coming away are for the receiver, and then I've got the power coming in is going into VIN, so volts in, and ground. So that's coming out on the black and the white wire. So I'll be feeding battery voltage into this. The other one is D16, which is the quick hitch terminal. So it's I've just terminated it onto a DuPont connector. So it's a female DuPont connector, and that is ready to connect onto the mid board. So I've got the male on this side of the board, so those 2 will connect in together, which will then connect the Arduino to the transistor. Then on top, these DuPont connectors here will connect onto those connections there. You can see there the voltage regulator on the bottom layer, or the base layer. We can see the side of the power distribution. This is the inside, towards the inside, so we've got the sockets there ready to plug the motors into. That's the other side of the voltage regulator. They're the motor driver inputs. So the wiring there is to go from the motor drivers to the outputs of the nano board. What we've got there is the power in, so voltage in, and so that's coming through to the power distribution point at the top. These three wires will be to connect to the receiver, and we've got the two servo connections, so they will be for the steering and the carriage. That's what we've got so far.